welcome everyone to the Tata Madiba dialogue. We are very excited to host you. My name is Balisa Natasha Mutapo. I am from Stellenbosch University, but I'm from Alex by origins, by birth. And I'm proud of where I come from. And I think that through the legacy of Tata Madiba, we've been able to achieve a lot in South Africa. In my family, I was the first one been going to a Model C school, first one to come to university, to even get a PhD here, experience a lot of the privileges that came with democracy. I'm also a recipient and alumnus of the Mandela Washington Fellowship, which recognizes young Africans in all sectors of the economy, public, civic, and business leadership. And we get to spend some time in America learning a lot of the policies that the government uses. So this initiative was launched by former President Barack Obama. But the basis of it is on the leadership traits of Tata Madiba. And as young people, I think that he is really still a driving force in the way we operate. I think the three of us are in the same age group. I think we in a different facets of our lives, from reading your bios, which I'll tell everybody a little bit about you. I can see that there are these elements of various leadership and understanding our background and context in which we operate as young leaders in our spaces. So everyone, welcome Samantha Richmond. She's a social scientist and she's coordinated and managed social science research related initiatives and programs and projects within public institutions of higher education, not-for-profit and for-profit companies or organizations, as well as publicly funded institutions. She's passionate about telling stories using a variety of different formats, and she's very experienced as a professional. I followed you. I went and trolled a little bit about who I'm going to be talking to today. So I'm very excited about seeing you, able to engage with you at this level. Lerato Kosi, he's from the townships of Cape Town, he says, and he's worked in the youth and development sector for 23 years for various local organizations. He's the founding director of Sigunyenendalo Pty Ltd. Sigunyenendalo means we are one, and he uses his passion to educate and address young people's issues and developing future leaders through connecting them with nature and hiking. That's wonderful. So today we're going to talk about what makes a good leader. And it's a loaded question in today's world. And I'm not even gonna start with the politics, but we are going to talk about Tata Madiba thought, and then we're gonna talk about this, like unpack this about what it means, and what is a good leader. What do we define as a good leader? So Tata Madiba says, as a leader, I have always endeavored to listen to what each and every person in a discussion had to say before venturing my own opinion. Oftentimes, my own opinion will represent a consensus of what I heard in the discussion. I always remember the axiom, a leader is like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon the others follow, not realizing that all along they are being directed from behind. That's amazing. So when we think about leadership, we think of the political leader, national campaigns, or persons who are, what we see on TV and we've been watching the American elections. We understand the context of leadership within a political landscape, but there are leaders everywhere. I like to tell my daughter that, no, leadership, it's hard. Even in class, even you're the leader of yourself, even. For you to be able to study and get to and pass, you led yourself. So you are a leader as well. You are a leader among your friends. You are a leader in any social context. So you are a leader. So for you, maybe you can share. Maybe Lerato will start with you. Where does it start? Where does leadership start for you?
Growing up in a township, you face with many challenges, and those challenges can lead you in not recognizing that leader in yourself. And I think for me, having time to yourself, introspection, listening to your inner being. That's where the leader comes from, because you can tell your daughter you are a leader, but that person really believes. And I think like when Baba Madiba talks about, because the way I've used leadership is more experiential. I always lead from the back. Leading from the back, it gives you a better perspective, about the people that you are working with. But also they see that as a leader, you don't always have to be in front, encouraging them to make those decisions for themselves. Remember, in making decisions and choices, sometimes we do make mistakes. But then I think for me, the most, like, it gives them a better perspective on how they lead and what kind of leadership skills they possess, and maybe what else do you need to improve? Because I think being a leader as well, you always need to learn to improve wherever you are lacking. As much as I don't want to use the word lacking, but for me, I think there are things that we don't foresee or we overlook, and I think once we have time to reflect on what has taken place, it gives us time to restructure how we are leading other people and how we're leading ourselves, because this thing starts with you. You cannot go out there to lead other people, whereas you don't know what kind of a person you are and what assets do you bring out into the world.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you are right. There are a lot of information that you put in there. I think particularly what stands out is the self-reflection, and understanding yourself as an individual. Samantha, so maybe you can tell us a little bit, how has growing up in South Africa shaped your views your views on leadership?
Thanks, Melissa. Also, thanks for inviting me to this. So actually, I'm a child of an exiled family, so I only half grew up in South Africa. So leadership takes on quite a very interesting meaning for me personally, in terms of, and I think it emulates as well Nelson Mandela's kind of philosophy of leadership. My grandparents were on the ground activists and against the anti-apartheid regime. And I think when they were doing it, they didn't think they were leaders, but actually they were, because they were standing up for something that they believed was, not right. And I think that's also in thinking about leadership, also as a woman in South Africa and being in senior leadership positions, you kind of, for me, that's always been something that's been in my head around standing up for what you believe in, but also that there are consequences sometimes of doing that. And for my family, the consequence is they had to go into exile. So I think my experience of growing up, because I moved back, I moved with my family back here just after the first democratic elections. I think I don't want to say spared, but I was probably shielded from the experience of this generation, our generation, and the actual struggles. And but at the same time, I experienced different, challenges, because you were not in the country where your heritage comes from. But for me, so in thinking about leadership, and when I was asked to be part of this conversation, the one thing that does strike out for me, and which was Tata Madiba's kind of thing, is really stand up for what you believe in, but also be prepared. Like, he knew he may spend years. I mean, I don't think he imagined he would spend as long as he did in jail. But, he kind of knew that was the sacrifice he had to make. And as a leader, I think that sometimes we don't always think about that, is that sometimes also, and it's interesting, the quote that you selected as well, in terms of trying to find consensus, and thinking about myself as a woman, which again, that's, I think, a whole other landscape around women and leadership, is when you do lead from behind, because there are still stereotypes around who should be leaders. There are sometimes consequences of, you know, trying to get that consensus, but also sometimes there isn't consensus, so you have to make difficult decisions, as this global health pandemic has actually shown us. So I think there's different strands that one can think of leadership. But for me, the one that really stands out, especially from the quote you made, was really around, you know, leaders kind of, you know, you stand up for what you believe in. And I liked what Larasha said about sometimes you don't know you're a leader, but actually you are being a leader because you're making a stand and going, you know, this is not right, or this is what needs to be done, or I need to rally the community together against something.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite amazing. I think, yeah, to have been not in the country and then coming back and experiencing the change in the country, I can imagine some of the difficulties as well. Seeing everything from the outside while you're growing up in a different space. But I think that in terms of how it develops one as a leader, when you're looking from outside, in fact, you have a better view of the kind of support structures, and you can actually separate the good leadership qualities from the not so good, because you're actually looking from the outside. So maybe, Samantha, if I can ask you, what would stand out as one of the top qualities? What do you consider as one of the top qualities of a leader? If you look at someone like Tata Madiba, and you look at his qualities, and what would you really, what for you would stand out?
I must say, and it's, as a woman in leadership, it's, but I actually see it as a point of strength because I've seen it in Tata Madiba, is the ability to acknowledge when you are wrong. And one of the things I remember very clearly was, but you know, we kind of, again, like if you think about it, like from an intellectual perspective, when the country came into democracy, the mandate of the ANC was, we need to build the economy because the country was bankrupt, right? And you can understand that that would be like a forefront policy. But years later, I remember Tata Madiba coming out and saying, I'm sorry that I didn't take the HIV/AIDS pandemic seriously from the start. And for me, that, I think, you know, again, I think there's a bit of a gendered issue. Like when a man says it, it's kind of respected. When a woman says it, it's a little bit like, no, you're showing you're weak. You need to be masculine and be like, I will not. But actually for me, that is the one thing I respect a lot. I respected a lot about him. And in my leadership practices, when I've been in positions of leadership, when I've done something wrong, I have called my team together and said, I'm sorry, that was a bad call. And for me, I think that's that humbleness. And I think that's what we all liked about Tata Madiba, was that humbleness and his ability to go, no, actually, I messed up a bit there. I should have. And he didn't try and give explanations as to why, even though we could understand why. He just said, I should have dealt with this the minute I was in office.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about education. I know that Madiba really valued education. Education to him was something to be highly prioritized. One of his quotes says that, you know, poverty, to get out of poverty, to end poverty, you need education. I'm just like summarizing it, but that's the message of that quote is, to end poverty, we need education. And we can think about it in the context of South Africa. How does education contribute in developing future leaders. I'm going to read one of the quotes here from Tata Madiba. It says, "No country can really develop unless its citizens are educated." Okay, so I got educated during the apartheid education system. I think we were like the relics. We still remember Jan van Riebeeck 1652. We still remember that. But in terms of the education and in its role in developing future leaders, what do we think? Maybe I can ask you, Lerato, is the post-apartheid education system benefiting our youth and by extension our country?
I will say yes in a way. I think my struggle with education, what I found it very challenging for me is how do you relate what you have learned into the classroom into your real life. Education has limited us in a way, because whatever you learn in a classroom, once you try to relate it into what is happening in your real life, and I think one thing for me that has been missing in education is how do we teach our young people so that they can relate into their daily lives, that dependency syndrome, because you are waiting for a class teacher to come and teach you,
Yeah.
And the way I've been teaching or facilitating is that when you enter into a classroom or into a learning space, is that you don't know it all, you don't know it all, but then you are there to ask questions, because remember, the people that we are working with or you are teaching, they also have a certain knowledge, and how can we how can you join the education that you have learned from your home, from your family, from your society into what is happening into a classroom setting. And I think for me that has been a battle for me, because education shouldn't only be at school and then once you after 2 o'clock books off and then you put your books down.
So you mean applied learning? For example, in sciences, the STEM, it's really a lot of it is applied knowledge, and the country is driving for this knowledge economy, and we're going to grow our future leaders in STEM, and academic leaders, and leaders in government. Yet there is no receptacle to receive these individuals. Training and giving them all these resources in the university, and then when they get to the workplace, they actually don't know. So you are right, there is this disconnect between education and what is required in the market, in terms of developing our country. And I think that's a flaw in terms of the leadership. The leadership has not thought about revamping the education. University is still operating the same way as it was centuries ago. Yet we are living in this digital economy. Technology is driving everything. Kids are already born knowing how to press that tablet. So please connect. But if you gave the 3-year-old that tablet, they would have known exactly how to go into Zoom, guys. It means that the needs that are the needs for in terms of the education are going to be different. They're not going to be the same as they were 100 centuries ago, and that we need to actually link government and industry and academic institutions together, as well as rethinking their foundational education. And anyway, within our organizations as well, we really have to think about the role of education. I don't know, Samantha, maybe if you read the article by Adam Habib that said that, we actually need to look at the qualification of our leaders in the public sector who run the government organization. What do you think about that in terms of the role of, having the right type of skills and the way that you lead when you are in an organization?
Firstly, I agree with Lerato around practicalities. One of the jokes I always make when I was kind of tutoring at university was, why did they never teach us how to fill out our taxes or apply for an ID or a bank card or skills, very practical skills to be an active citizen, which I think the education system has just not grasped at all. I think life orientation was meant to, but it just hasn't quite cracked at it. But at the same time, I think history is important, right? And I think institutions, particularly of higher learning, that understanding that historical knowledge is also really important for how we think about constructing the future. And that's why it's important, I think, for especially people who we as citizens choose to be in offices, political offices to represent us, do need to be qualified. And I think they do need to be qualified beyond grade 12, because there is something does happen to your brain when you go into postgraduate education. And again, I think it could be done earlier in terms of, and that was one of the struggles, you know, when tutoring first years, was there was no critical thinking because they were very used to being spoon-fed at school, you know, and it's kind of like, so what do I need to know? What do I need to learn for the test, the exam, the, you know, the assignment? And for me, you know, that kind of thinking is important and should be incorporated, you know, so that if people also don't want to, you know, go into university, that they can also still make a livelihood. Because I think in Africa and in most what is classified as developing countries, that's the tipping point, is that if you don't get educated, you don't have opportunities, which is also for me very problematic. But in terms of our leaders, I do think there does need to be a bit more kind of, we really could benefit from people who have kind of, you know, walked the halls of universities. And yes, university curriculums are not perfect. I think they could do with a bit more, as Laurent was saying, the practicalities of how things are, because it can be very theory heavy unless you as an individual kind of seek out ways to gain those practical skills. You can literally just come out and be like, okay, I know all these theories, but, and then you get into your place of work and you're like, wait, but none of this reflects my, you know, the theories I've been taught. And but I think we definitely could benefit from education and having leaders who are, you know, who have gone down that road and have actually skilled themselves, because the country will ultimately benefit from that.
Yeah, and this is so very important, that education does not mean going to the university only. You can learn in many ways. You can learn in many ways, and actually, people who go to other like technicons, and they learn with their hands. They do carpentry. They do all of these things. That, like, when you leave that place, you can make money that day. You can do something that day that will earn you an income. And meanwhile, at university, you know, people are not taught. They're not taught about entrepreneurship. They're not taught about, you know, how to go work. As a scientist, and I like to do this, you know, just for fun. Maybe I shouldn't do it often, but I do it just for fun. And then I say, you know, especially with the students that are doing their honors and you in the class, and I ask them, so where do you want to work? I don't know, maybe at the university. I'm like, okay, well, you can't come and be in this room, in this class, and then you don't know where you're going to end up, who's going to be your employer. Do you even want to be employed? Do you want to, you know, start a business? What do you want to do? Because it's not easy to get into an academic institution and say you're going to be a professor once. It's really not easy. It's a tough journey.
Yeah.
I've worked it, I know. So those who manage to get in are really, really lucky, and they should be in a space where they can lead the change in the way that education is provided. But one thing I like to ask is like, oh, okay, so now you are here. They're going to ask you something like, do you know about environmental law? You know, in the government they use NEMBA and all sorts of laws in their policies and everything. The decision making is revolving around these policies and laws and acts and whatnot. You need to understand that if you want to go and you go for an interview, you don't know that. So then that you've lost that position simply because you did not know. But the university has a responsibility to educate you on the practicalities of the workplace, the skills that you need for the workplace, or how to become an entrepreneur. Because you can sell knowledge, it's fine, it's possible. So I think we must move on a little bit and talk about good and bad leadership. I think that in South Africa, we have a problem of trusting our leaders. Our leaders are not honest with us. They're not open with us. As Sam, you just mentioned that what you love about Tata Madiba was that he could admit when he was wrong, and you even apply that into your own life in various ways when you in your leadership positions, and you call your team and you say, guys, that was a bad call, I'm sorry, let's do better, and I will do better as well. And Tata Madiba could do that, but our leaders refuse to admit when they are wrong, and because of that, they have lost the trust of the people. My grandparents, when we talk about, yeah, who's the president, they all think about Nelson Mandela. They don't call anyone else, not
Mm.
Zuma, not anyone. Nelson Mandela is still the president of South Africa, and this is why they only want to talk about Nelson Mandela, and because of what he represents. I think I just want to hear your thoughts around your feelings about um, the leadership that we have in terms of the ethics. Where have we gone wrong, and where have they gone wrong, and what do we need? What do we need in order to repair that?
Um, for me, I think where we've gone wrong, which is, I think, one of the fundamental things about leadership is transparency. Um, and, I think we also talk about leadership. We're talking about everything differently in 2020 because of what has happened. And I know there's also a whole debate around ethical leadership. And surprisingly, I watched a BBC Africa insert where they actually spoke about how, African leaders have actually done something right because, we've actually responded a lot better to the coronavirus than what we expected from, the first world countries. Um, but I think for me, one of the things is just lack of transparency.
Mm,
Um, but also, I think this is where it ties back to education around people not knowing their rights, people not understanding the political landscape. Um, and, we always hear these stories of, and, during election time saying, if you don't vote for this party, you're going to lose your grant. And not under, that's, I think, where we went wrong as well, is the coupling of political and civil. Because I do think if our kind of institutions that are meant to serve the country were filled with civil servants who
mm,
had zero political affiliations, like strong political affiliations, we would better serve the country. Um, but instead, because it's been politicized, you end up with fighting happening versus actually, getting on with the job and
mm,
actually doing what we voted you to do, which is to serve us.
yeah.
So I think for me, it's two things. It's one, well, it's a couple of things. It's transparency on the part of leaders, and I do understand that there are points where you you can't be as transparent. Um, but I always think the one day I always equate it to one time I was coming from West Africa, and there was a terrible storm in Cape Town, like worst storm in like I don't know how many years. And the pilot, when he took off in Johannesburg, said the ride will be smooth, but the minute we hit Cape Town airspace, it's gonna get rough. And I think about how he handled that situation. He
Mm,
communicated with us at every single point. You know, we were about to land, and then thunder struck the on the what you call it, the runway, and
mm,
we had to pull up. And he said, "You probably felt that we had to pull up," but he talked us through exactly what was happening, and I remember when we actually got on the ground, people clapped for him. And that was because he communicated, so you're not sitting there going, is this plane going to crash or not? And it's a perhaps a silly example, but that's exactly it. It's like, especially in times of crisis, you need your leaders to be communicating to you and going, this is what's happening. This is what we're trying to do. This is, okay, money's gone missing, lots of money. This is what we're doing to handle that, And also as citizens, I do think South Africans have gotten tired though. And I think we're starting to see the fatigue from South Africans of like, okay, you guys need to start talking to us now. You can't just be leading behind a brick wall. We also want to be part, and we want to know. And we're not stupid, because I think also a lot of leaders think that their citizens are stupid and so they can get away with everything. And it's nice to actually see South Africans kind of going, no, we may not understand everything, but that doesn't look right, and you need to explain it to us.
Yeah, very, very right. I love that transparency and communication, especially in times of crisis. And that is really signs of an exceptional leader who understands and recognizes the feelings and acknowledges the feelings of the people that they are leading, and that it is essential. I mean, you felt safe even though there was a thunderstorm. You felt safe that you were in safe hands with this person who was leading and communicating and being very transparent, even about the severity of the problem. And I think that one thing that my brother likes to say to me is, with the way South Africans, especially if you grow up in the townships, Lerato will know that after a democracy, everyone was promised things. There will be houses, there will be electricity, there will be school, there will be, and people just sat back and relaxed and put out their hands like this and expected. And when the expectations were not met, people felt they were failed. And the problem happened when that communication did not include the fact that you have to work hard, you have to give well, you have to make effort, you have to support us in our initiative, you have to protect the things that we give you, you have to put value to the things that we give you and provide for you, that they won't come fast. That development is not something that is an overnight. I think that where our leaders failed the people, and the people also failed themselves in that they chose to wait and sit back instead of doing something. And if you look at the Tata Madiba's leadership, even before he got arrested, they were action, they were action people. They spoke up, they confronted very difficult situations. And when things were not right, they confronted very difficult situations. We have a different way as young people of confronting difficult situations. We protest and we burn stuff, and that is not okay. And I think it's a sign of the leadership problems that we have been having, and the irresponsibility that happened in promising people without expecting, even saying something is 1 rand. If you have to pay 1 rand for that water, you will value that water because it costs you 1 rand. It's not a lot, it costs you 1 rand. There is something about saying something is free, that people don't value it. They don't care for it, which is a bit problematic for us. So I think as we wrap up our very beautiful conversation, I'm really loving hearing your thoughts around the leadership and what it meant, in seeing how Tata Madiba lived his life and how we can reflect some of that in our lives today as young people today. So what advice would you give to young South Africans at this time in terms of the leadership and outlook, the general outlook?
I will say now is the time, and the time is now. Because I think one other thing that our leaders are actually forgetting is that, I mean, the empathy. You know, empathy is when you think about your clients. What are they feeling? What are they seeing? What are they thinking? And we are disconnected from that. Our leaders, they don't even care about how we feel, what do we think, what do we see, you know, and what do we want to do. Because I like what you've just said now, Palisa, in terms of the promises, you know. Once you become a leader, you tend to forget about those promises that you've made, because now the vote has been cast next to your name, and then you get the seat. All of a sudden, you just become quiet. But then, before we even vote, you will see political parties coming into Kailicha, Kukuletu Nyanga, giving T-shirts, food parcels, and engaging with people, you know, and there's that connection that we need in South Africa. But then once these political parties have been voted, they disappear, you know, and they disappear with all those promises. You will never even see a leader coming into community now asking guys, how are things, you know, how are you guys doing? And that creates a disconnection. And yes, people are wrong when they're banning the stuff, but then that comes from once you have made the promise and then you don't fulfill the promise, what are you expecting people to do? You know, we have led people with anger. In today, we don't even trust each other. Living in one community, we don't trust each other. Like, I'm running an organization, I'm working with young people, but I see that they finding it hard to trust this person. I've grown up in the same community with them, but then now I'm speaking a different language, and they're like, but Lerato, who are you to come and tell us, you know? Whereas there are other leaders who came before you and gave us empty promises. And for me, I think, again, it's about that thing of empathy, not knowing what people are thinking, seeing, and feeling, and saying. And I think it's something that we really need to consider, and maybe something that we need to practice, you know, in our leadership styles. Yeah.
Very true. Thank you, Lerato. And Sam?
Pleasure.
I mean, I completely echo. I think what Lerato is saying is, you know, it's time to hand the baton off to the younger people. You know, we're still doing things, but actually the change is with them. And, you know, but at the same time, I think, and I'm really glad you brought up the issue of the empty promises and you know, because I think that's where a lot of the anger has stemmed from, especially amongst the young population. It's like, okay, you failed my parents or you failed my grandparents. Now you're also going to fail me. But, you know, at the same time, I mean, South Africa is hailed globally for the kind of political and constitutional infrastructure that it has put in place. So I also say to young people, you know, instead of burning tires and burning down your libraries, which are resources to your community, right, and schools, use the policies, work in the system to make the change. But that also requires that you start to understand how the system works, you know. But, you know, so for me, for young people, it's again about that civic education, which I think is completely lacking in our schools, because kids don't even know what some of the laws are that, you know, that are in place. But I do think change doesn't come from destruction. You know, change comes from actually going, you know what? We have the strongest constitution in the world. Let's start using it to create and build the type of country we want to live in. A country, that constitution was created so that there is equality and that, you know, and that everybody has a chance. Unfortunately, we've gone very wrong somewhere along the way. And I think this is where I kind of say to young people, you can still, you know, this is your time, but your time doesn't have to involve destruction of infrastructure that was built for you. Fight the battle the right way, if you want to say it. It's like, use the constitution, use the laws that the country has, because we've got airtight laws, and start, that's literally how we start to have change happen.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful insights. Yeah, I think very important. Empathy, very important. And fight the right way. That is really, really, I think, very, very important, especially as young people, to look at what are we destroying. It's not even going to benefit anyone. No one is going to listen to us because of the ruckus behavior, ruckus young people who don't listen. And so it's very important for us to also learn about these laws, to go read the Constitution, to learn about our rights. And our rights does not mean that we must violate the rights of others in trying to get our rights respected. So I'm going to close with Tata Madiba's quote here that says, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead." So we have to care about others. We have to care about the development of other people in our communities. We have to care about our country. We have to care about each other. So thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. Really wonderful to hear your different perspectives, your lived histories, and your leadership, and how you've impacted those around you. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for a great discussion.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lerato.
Thank you, Lerato.
Sure. Thanks.